The Maroon White Pod brought to you by citylink. For bookings, timetables, updates and any other information, head to citylink.ie. You're welcome along to the Maroon White Pod. This week I'm delighted to be joined by former Offaly hurler and of RT Sport as well, and Brian Carroll. Brian, thanks very much for coming on. The league came to a conclusion. Here to probably get an outside view because we've had a lot of people on the podcast from Galway in recent weeks about their league campaign. But overall, what have you made of Galway in 2024 so far?
Um, Very much the same we've seen throughout the league for under Henry's tenure, being honest. Some good days, probably against Limerick the last day, I suppose, and then Jekyll and Hyde performance against Tipperary, I felt. Um, Probably similar against Dublin, so it's been up and down. You wouldn't be saying it was the best league campaign of all time. It probably finished on a high note. There probably was a bit of doom and gloom after the Dublin game, thinking, God, are Galway going in the right direction at all? But they put in a serious shift against Limerick, obviously. So it's okay. That's what I would say. It's okay. Like Henry's tenure, I suppose, into his third year, he's no silverware yet. You'd be wondering, should they have been going the approach of Clare in trying to get, silverware, a national title similar to Derry football, knowing that they're good enough to say win these big competitions. Look, there's no doubt Galway were probably unlucky in the last two Leinster, well, definitely last year's Leinster final. But at the same time, I think Henry will be disappointed that he's covered his bear at this stage as well.
Yeah, just with that, there was obviously disappointment there with not getting to the league semi-final. As you mentioned, Henry was clear that was an aim for them. But as you mentioned there, positives against Limerick, but then, as you mentioned, there was very up and down against Tip, and those were probably the two main games where Go were probably looking for a victory in either of those games.
Yeah, look, the first half against Tip in particular was brutal. They came out in the second half and hurled extremely well, made it a great game. Um, and Conor Cooney was really to the fore that day, driving them on. And you thought, right, okay, it's the league, it's early doors, a lot of teams, it's Jekyll and Hyde performances, as I said. You'd put Cork in that bracket, you've certainly put Tipperary in there. Even Kilkenny at times were in there as well. So, you'd be kind of going, look, it's early league form. But I think, along with the teams I've named, I think there's a huge amount of chopping and changing happening with the team. And I know they need to run players and give them game time in the league. I need to bring maybe some of the older players back from injury and ease in their game time and all that. But could you say now what the starting 15 is for Galway?
No.
Again, 3 years into Henry's tenure, can you say who the full back, who the centre back is? Can you say what their half back line is going to be? Can you say what the midfield partnership is going to be? I think you have an idea of maybe 12 or 13 of the hurlers, but you have no idea of where people are going to be playing. And I know that to some extent you need to be able to pull a rabbit out of a hat and surprise teams. But the best teams down through all of history of the GAA have had a settled backline in particular, a really commanding half backline, probably a really strong midfield partnership. And yes, they might have 5 of the 6 forwards nailed on, and you might be able to rotate them a little bit. But, still at the same time, I don't think we're seeing that from Tipperary, from Galway. You're not seeing it from Tipperary. You're not seeing it from Cork. And I think similarly, I think Kilkenny are in that bracket as well. So it's that inconsistency, especially, as I said, 3 years into Henry and in his backroom team now.
Yeah, it's a great point. We've nearly been debating it every week on the podcast of who's going to be full and centre back. We've obviously seen Fintan Burke and Keenan Fahey there for the majority of the league. Where does Dahi Burke play? Shane Cooney, we were all thinking he was going to break through after being so impressive for Thomas's. As you mentioned, there's a debate there for those positions, but it's probably not the best thing really going into the Leinster Championship to have this uncertainty around their starting 15.
Yeah, now look, probably the only thing I will say for both Galway and probably Kilkenny's perspective, they are a step ahead of the rest of Leinster. So they probably are able to tinker a little bit more with their team throughout the Leinster campaign. No disrespect to these teams, but they obviously should be beaten Antrim, and they should be beating Carroll. They'll probably be able to experiment a little bit in that. They're still ahead of Dublin and they're still ahead of Wexford. Yes, if they take them seriously, but they are ahead of them consistently. But I suppose they have that little bit more leeway. But at the same time, I suppose you want to be seeing that little bit of consistency with their team, and I suppose those main positions we've seen. And look, Park Mannion obviously is another fantastic leader for Galway over the last number of years, but they seem to be needing him in two positions or three positions even. He's always putting out fires, I feel. And it's something similar with Cotton Mannion. We've seen him start midfield, we've seen him play the sweeper role, you know what I mean? And it's just, I know they're probably trying to get whatever the best is and get Cotton Mannion on the ball as much as possible. But it's about I suppose the other players really finding consistency. Like if you go back to when Galway last won the All Ireland, like their team barely changed throughout the year. You'd have maybe 17, 18 guys, rotating in those two or three, but those 12, 13 main players were nailed on, full back, centre back, half midfield, and going over the same stuff. But they were all nailed on, and you knew them exactly. I think Galway really, really need to settle down on that.
Just with 3 and 6 for Galway, what would you do there?
Look, it's hard to know. Look, Dottie Burke won 4 All-Stars in a row at full back, and then he's been playing centre back probably for the last couple of years. It's hard to know. Grode McInerney, again, when he's at full back, he's done nothing wrong. But I suppose at centre back, maybe he's not doing enough hurling, but he certainly was shoring up that centre of the defence. Obviously very commanding in the air. Was able to play to his strengths, was able to, maybe give the ball out to the runners, all those sort of things. So he was, he offered a huge amount there. But I don't know, being honest. Look, Shane Cooney obviously was very good for St. Thomas's, but there's a huge difference between inter-county and club. It's light years apart. Obviously the speed of the game, the length of the game, all those sort of things. It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder, and such a pivotal position. It's hard to transition in and hold down a position as centre back. But I'm not really giving the answers, but I suppose I'd be quicker to return to what worked in Dottie, Burke and Garrod rather than saying it. It just seemed wrong to me to be the other way around with Garrod at centre Garrod at fullback and Dottie at centre back. It just seems to be almost mixed up. But look, maybe that's going off training form, all those sort of things. I think Fintan Burke has to be looked at seriously, whether it's at fullback or centre back. He's such a warrior. He has the inter-county experience as well. He brings that toughness, that big game mentality, all those sort of things. But he hasn't, he didn't really feature at all last year. He hasn't been a mainstay in the team over these last couple of years either. But I think if you didn't want Dottie Burke full back anymore, I'd be probably trying Fintan there and maybe even Dottie in the corner. He's a brilliant man marker when he gets his head into that role. And you could maybe play Garrod centre back and Park Mannion wing back beside him. I think you've the mainstay of 4 serious backs there.
The competition is really grown. Even when you talk about those other positions, you have Darren Morrissey, if Jack Grealish, Port Mannion, as we've mentioned, like there's going to be a real battle for some of those positions to get the players in. But David Bark obviously looks like he's going to be a mainstay there, and it's nearly looking like he's going to be partnered by Sean Lennon this year.
Yeah, and look, obviously it's great to see David back to his best. To bounce back from his crucial injury so quickly, and in the performances he put in the All Ireland semi-final and final for the club was phenomenal. But he seems to have found a new lease of life. Almost got an Indian summer in his career. Under Shane O'Neill, it didn't suit him. Being honest, the system didn't suit him. And it's great to see him flourish again. Sean Lennon's a hardy bit of stuff. He brings a bit of steel. He loves to mix it up, get involved. He has athleticism as well. But there's loads of lads there as well. There's Ronan Glennon, what you do with Tom Monaghan as well. So they do have lots of options. Whereas Keenan Fatty, is he a half forward? Is he midfield? Is he half back? So there's lots of options. I think Darren Morrissey and Jack Grealish, as you mentioned, I think they're both very, very good players. But I would think if you're looking to try and get get them. I think there's only room for one of them, being honest. And that's why I'd be looking at even as a Dottie as a cornerback, and one of those two as the other two cornerbacks. And I know that's harsh, but I think you're trying to get your best six backs out there.
With Keenan Van, you mentioned him there. He probably has been the biggest positive for Galway so far in 2024, would you say?
Yeah, to be fair to me, his consistency of performances, obviously strong in the air, striking's always very good. Very, very honest. He comes across that way anyway, certainly. Huge positive. I think he's almost probably put his name on the starting 15, definitely. But again, I'll go back to it. It's where are they going to play him? And I know it's been quite good in the half back line, but are they going to persist with that or not? That's probably the question mark around that.
When it comes to the forwards, then you're obviously going to have Conor Cooney, Joseph Cooney, Cathal Mannion, Brian Cannon, Conor Whelan. In certain games, they played Evan Island. Evan Island is that 95% free taker who's going to score the majority of frees for you. As you mentioned, you have Tom Monaghan, who's went well in the league, Gavin Lee, but is Evan Island alone for his frees just a player who has to start?
I think there has to be more to your game at intercounty level than just frees. But I do think Evan brought that last year. If you go back to the first round against Wexford, he was actually excellent. I was at that game. I think he was fairly consistent throughout the championship as well. He's worked a lot on his game. Yes, he favours his left, but he does have a right side as well. Probably guilty of that myself. I think he's brought a lot more to his game last year, in particular, and I think he worked his way on to a deserving starting position last year, certainly. And he obviously has that added bonus of the frees. I think there's probably a good few hurlers there that they probably need to be more consistent in their performances. And just mention that game against Wexford. Like, Wexford were down 3 or 4 starters in that game last year. Lee Chin cried off just before the game. They were short a few more. Galway were very sloppy in that first half, gave away 2 sloppy goals. They kept Wexford at arm's length, but like Galway there was no one even, Pearse Stadium that day going, geez, Galway are going to win All Ireland this year. That was a very poor performance. And it didn't really, it took them a while to stutter into that Leinster Championship thereafter. I'd love to see Galway really really go for it. Properly go for Wexford, go for Dublin, and really stamp their authority in those teams. And whatever about Kilkenny in the group games, they've shown they're able to beat them. But in terms of a Leinster Championship, to really I think they have to win the Leinster final this year, being honest. I just think they do. I know we've heard Joe Canning say it in the past that they don't mean a lot to him. But I think in terms of the overall team goals, yes, it's not as important as the All Ireland, but I think they really have to go and they have to start winning these big games against Kilkenny, against the big teams in Croke Park, because that's the measure. It's easy to say afterwards, the All Ireland is the mainstay. I understand that. No one disagrees with that. But you've got to start winning the big games in Croke Park. It's as simple as that. And you can say they were unlucky. I understand that. But you've still got to find a way. Kilkenny will always find a way. So Galway need to start bringing that steel into it and stop making excuses, essentially. And that's probably across the board, and it's the same where I started out. This was the consistency of their performances of players. Some players can be a 9 out of 10 some days and they're down a 6 and 7 the next day. So it's probably to get that consistently, that up to an 8 every day to go out into the field, and maybe nailing on their positions. Tom Monaghan can be one of those players. He can be brilliant one day, come on, score 4 or 5 points, and then you won't even know he's on the field the next day. So it's that's probably something that can certainly be held over Galway over not just Henry's tenure, over the last number of years, being honest.
Yeah, the record under Henry, as you mentioned, in Croke Park, it hasn't obviously been what the players and management wanted to be. But you're mentioning there the Leinster title, and every guest I've had on the podcast this year has just said it's imperative for Galway to win this Leinster title. You are obviously expecting Galway and Kilkenny to be in the Leinster final. That'd be Galway's 3rd Leinster final in a row, and just to improve on that record, and I suppose with this current management team, you'd be entering a third Leinster final in a row. So it's just even more bigger to win for this group.
It is, yeah. And as I said, like it's a provincial final in Croke Park against the old enemy Kilkenny, who have obviously created enough heartache for Galway and many other teams over the years. And they just, to me, they just have to go win it. Look at the attitude of Derry. No one ever regrets winning. You seen Conor Glass say that last week. People say, "Oh, it could hurt them further on the line." That's all rubbish. The best teams come and they sweep everything before them, and they target every day to go out to win. They don't pick and choose what days they want to win, and they don't make excuses afterwards that that's not part of the bigger picture. Yes, management need to spin that to players. Of course, we're not naive and not stupid here. If you don't win, you have to pick it up and dust yourself off and go again. But I just think, as I said, I just think they need to go ahead and actually, get their hands on a cup and win that silverware that needs to be done, and puff out their chest and say, we're coming, and we're letting everyone know we're coming, because that's essentially what Galway did in 2017. They swept everyone before them. Like, they went down to Wexford Park that year and they absolutely annihilated Wexford down there. I was actually on commentary that day. They went route one on top of Johnny Glynn. Galway had six huge forwards that went high as possible, and they just overpowered them and were way too strong. And there was a sense like we're just a cut above these and we're ahead of them. I think Galway need to bring that to the Leinster Championship this year with Wexford and Dublin in particular.
A man you mentioned there, Johnny Glynn. What have you made of him returning to the fold?
Look, if he's able to offer his services, it's a no-brainer. You bring him in. Like, he's such a handful. He's unlike any other player in the game. He's so strong in the air. By all accounts, he's a great fella in terms of being in the panel and supporting other guys and being a positive kind of part of the camp, as opposed to a negative drain. He offers something different. He's still relatively young. Yes, he's been out of the game, but he's kept himself in good shape, obviously. Playing a bit of football in New York, playing a bit of hurling, playing the club hurling last year. So I think it's a no-brainer. I don't know how it would work if he's not living in Ireland. I don't know if you can continue to do that at this age. That's kind of a one-off. But then some people are just able to do it, and he has the personality clearly to do it as well. So I think Henry's right to explore the option anyway.
Just when we mentioned the league campaign and everything with Galway, what have been the positives so far with this Galway team for you?
I wouldn't have seen a huge amount, being honest. Maybe that last performance against Limerick puts a bit of gloss on the league and say, right, we're not a million miles away, definitely. But up to that, Jesus, the league, 5 or 6 out of 10, I think you'd have to give it most, even at that. I'm probably being generous. I thought it was very, very poor going into that Limerick game. You know, it's look, it's clearly not a priority for them, and that's fine. And they're looking at the bigger picture, and that's quite obvious the way they approach this league. So, but as I said, I think I need to change that narrative going into the Leinster Championship. Paul, give me 1 second now.
Yep, no matter.
Hey, I'm doing some work. Okay, come on, I'm doing some work. Off you go. Stop trying to come in. On to me. Go. Sorry, Bob.
No bother, no bother.
You'll have to cut that.
Yeah, no, you're good. Just with that, when you say there's not a whole amount of positives from the league and maybe it wasn't a priority, do you think management or players there would have to pick themselves up after and what you say at this point in the league?
No, because in fairness to them, I think that I do think that game against Limerick puts a real positive spin on it and re-energizes the group. By all accounts, they're gone off in a warm holiday training camp. I don't know, you might know that for definite, but that's what
Yeah,
I heard. And I think that would have been a real tonic going to that training camp. And I could imagine that they'd be going with a relative pep in their step, despite the earlier rounds in the league. I think it was badly needed, that performance for the group. And I expect, and I think the whole country expects Galway to be there or thereabouts and in the business thing, when it all shakes up. But as I said to you, if we're talking about Galway trying to win All Ireland here, because ultimately that's the goal every year with Galway, I think I just think they need to be almost bully-like in their approach. I think that's when Galway hurling is at their best. Go back to the late 80s, go back to the early 80s. Galway, tough, uncompromising, strong characters on the field, well able to hurl. And they just, when Galway are at their ultimate best, they take no prisoners. And I think this Galway side they have enough hurlers to do it. They certainly do. It's just about getting that into them and that consistency in their play. I think that's the big thing for them. So it's about, obviously taking that league performance against Limerick and going up another notch or two consistently every day to go out.
You mentioned the All-Ireland there. Is that a possibility for Galway to win the All-Ireland this year?
I don't see why not. Yes, they've shown the last 2 years that they haven't been capable of beating Limerick. But if you go to the rest, you go Kilkenny, Clare, Cork, Tipperary, they're all on a par with Galway. All those teams are capable of beating any of the others on any given day. I think there's no doubt about that. It's been proven time and time again. People say Clare are the next best team to Limerick, on the virtue that they can beat Limerick, and they've shown they can beat Limerick in the Munster Championship. But Clare have shown that they haven't been able to perform when it goes to Croke Park. And probably the same has been shown for Galway. It's not that they can't perform, but they've been struggling to win in Croke Park right now. And that's the litmus test. At the end of the day, Limerick are a different animal when they get to Croke Park. Kilkenny are very, very difficult to beat when they're in Croke Park. They're not as invincible as they used to be, obviously, but they're not the team they used to be either. But you associate Limerick going to Croke Park, you think, oh my God, they're gonna tear teams apart. There's a whole different aura about them. There's there's the expectancy that they're going to perform. There's question marks around all the other teams when they go to Croke Park. And that's why I think that Galway need to be front runners in that perspective and really, really, really going for it. And, taking no prisoners as they go along and building up the performance, building up the consistency of what they're trying to do. So can they win it? Yes, they can. Remember, someone else could be Limerick in an All-Ireland semi-final, or Limerick might get out of Munster. And crazy things can happen, So they might have to beat Limerick to win the All-Ireland. So are they capable of beating any of the rest teams? Certainly.
Are Limerick still a team you expect to climb the steps of the Hogan stand this year?
They have to be. Look, I know that we're very poor in the league semi-final, but we can't write them off based on one poor performance in 5 years. Still players to come back. They'll be hurting after that. Sometimes that can come at the right time for John Kiley. It could be exactly the tonic that he needed. Or, and only time will tell, it could be a sign of a downturn in them. I think for all the other teams, I think what Kilkenny did that day was they went after Limerick that day. They went after their big players. They went after Will O'Donoghue. They went after Cian Lynch. They're trying to break the aura that those players have. And that's very, very important when you're trying to break down ultimately what are the best team around at the moment. That's what Tipperary did to Kilkenny back in 2010, 2009, 2010. That's what they did. They went after them. They tried to show that they were human. But look, Limerick have such a strong starting 15, and they have obviously very, very good young players starting through. You would say they still seem to be a step of everyone else. It'd be very hard to back against them, put it this way. But was there kind of cracks there shown in this league that maybe teams could get them? There certainly was. There's enough there to send teams off training for those 3 or 4 weeks going into championship saying, right, look, we believe there could be something there that we could take, so. But look, at the same time, Limerick, when they turn it on, they're awesome.
Is that the template for other teams to follow now, what Kilkenny did to Limerick in the league semi-final?
Oh yeah, I think what Limerick have, everyone concentrates on Limerick's hurling and the phenomenal passes of play that they put together and moving the ball through the lines, delivering long, particularly in championship. I think they played some rubbish games there. Against Tipperary, it was one of the worst games of hurling I've ever seen. All that hand passing and flicks off the hurl. It was absolutely, from a neutral perspective, it was a dire game to watch. You would be hoping hurling doesn't continue in that vein of form, because it was just, it was basically football played with hurls. It was shocking stuff. But Limerick don't play like that in Championship. They just don't. Yes, they string together 2 or 3 or 4 short passes, but they try to hit a lot of long ball inside. Fast ball, not always perfect ball. Galán, Seamus Flanagan, when they're on it, are able to win their own ball. But how do you beat Limerick? Well, first and foremost, before you talk any tactics, you've got to outwork them, and consistently outwork them for 75 minutes plus. Clare have shown that, and Limerick, sorry, and Kilkenny are the only teams that have been able to somewhat match them for 70, 75 minutes. Galway did it in the league this year. They've done it for periods of time in the last 2 All-Ireland semi-finals, but they haven't been able to do it for 70 minutes plus. That's where Galway have probably been lacking. And if you don't win the arm wrestle, or at least break even with Limerick in terms of the work rate, the physical battle, the ability to win your own ball on the ground, in the air, win the rucks, well, then you're at nothing, because then if Limerick are winning that, they're definitely going to wipe the floor with you in hurling then on top of that. So that to me is first and foremost. I don't think it's capable of running around Limerick. There are times you have to run around them, but I don't think that can be your only game plan. I think you've got to take them on physically, um, and obviously move them as well. But you have to be able to do both. There has to be it has to be 2 or 3 or 4 kind of strings to your bow, but you can't shy away from the physical battle. No way.
You're mentioning there Limerick and the Munster Championship. That's obviously going to be a complete war zone and battles in those games. But from a Galway perspective, if you're looking at their fixtures in the Leinster Championship, they've Carroll first, then Kilkenny, then in the third round they travel to Wexford Park, then travel to Corrigan Park and finish with that game against Dublin in Pearse Stadium. But for this Leinster Championship, even starting against Carlow, and we even seen at the weekend, Carlow were heavily beaten in the end by Laois. There is going to be kind of a stop-start nature with this Leinster Championship, where Galway would probably hand out some heavy defeats. Probably you would expect, really, with against Carlow and Wexford and Dublin have been good and bad in the league, and Antrim obviously down a lot of bodies. How do they prepare for a Leinster Championship like this?
Yeah, I think Limerick. Sorry, back to Limerick for a second, but I think they've shown the template for how to run their panel really well throughout the league. Under John Kiley's tenure, he owned 11 to 12 of the team out, bringing in your 3 or 4 guys that are trying to break on, and he always puts a newcomer or someone trying to break on beside experienced players, and I think it's been a brilliant template to follow. I think Henry needs to do something similar in how he approaches the Carlow and Antrim games. I don't think he can have 8 or 10 changes. You've got to still take those games seriously while getting game time into your main players, while building that consistency in the team that I've already referred to. And as I said, John Kiley has the template, and it's just learn from the best. It's as simple as that. And look, I think that's how Henry needs to approach it. Obviously Kilkenny's always going to be a big game. It never fails to be not. I don't think that group game is crucial. Being honest, I think you turn Kilkenny over. Yes, you want to do it every time you go out, but that won't make or break your championship. For me, it's to make sure, and I know I'm repeating myself, it's to make sure that you're comfortably beating Carlow, you're comfortably beating Antrim, because that can be a tricky assignment up in Corrigan Park. It can be tough, and to me, it's making sure you're keeping your foot on the neck of Dublin and Wexford, and keeping them one step ahead of them, and letting them know that you're ahead of them. Like, let's be honest, like Dublin probably should have beaten Galway last year in Croke Park. Again, probably no one really saw that coming. As I said, Galway were very poor against Wexford. Very, very inconsistent. Whereas, as I said, repeating myself here now, but 3 years into Henry Shefflin, I think they really need to be, really showing that they're way ahead of them.
Is it very hard for you to see anyone other than Galway and Kilkenny in this year's Leinster final?
It's not very hard, being honest, because as I said, if Galway go with their inconsistent approaches they have in the league and they did in last year's Leinster Championship, there's nothing stopping Wexford turning them over. Wexford are a different entity this year. It's in Wexford Park. So, no, it's not a shoe-in. I'm talking like it should be because of the players that Galway have and because of the level of performance that we know they're capable of. But their inconsistency, no, it's not a shoe-in. I wouldn't say that at all. And particularly that away fixture to Wexford could prove to be very, very tricky. And if they haven't approached the first three games correctly going into that game, they could find themselves in a very, very sticky situation down in Wexford Park, which Wexford Park is always a game of two halves as well because of the wind. It's a huge bearing on every game that's played down there in league and championship. And, you give Wexford say Wexford started with the wind and tore into them, like we seen in very different teams out, obviously, as we saw in the Walsh Cup, get their gander up and Wexford go in with a commanding lead at half time. Very hard to work out a victory in that second half, playing against the wind or playing with the wind against Wexford in Wexford Park. So very, very tricky fixture. So that's why I think those first couple of games are very important to how you build this team towards that fixture, being honest.
Do you think we should start to see Eamon O'Shea's influence as this championship progresses?
Ah, yes, of course. Look, Eamon's obviously a brilliant, brilliant coach and well regarded by the Tipperary people that have trained under him. You would like to think that I see people saying, "Oh, will Johnny Glynn fit into Eamon O'Shea's system, or will such and such fit?" Like Eamon O'Shea, as all top coaches are, they make the system work around the players they have. That's what you'd like to think anyway. He got the best out of Tipperary based off what Tipperary had at that time. Um, and I'd like to think that's exactly what Eamon O'Shea is going to do with these players. But look, Galway have shown they've been tactically very astute as they were against Tipperary last year. Playing Cottleman in that sweeper role. They did something similar against Limerick the year before. They were probably caught in last year's All-Ireland semi-final after 25 minutes. They had absolutely torn into Limerick, were ripping them to shreds. And Henry did something that was probably against his overall nature, but probably had too much of a manager's cap on. He told the players to retreat, and he was caught on camera doing it, and I don't think Henry would ever have done that as a player, but that's what happens. Unfortunately, when you're in the hot seat of being managers, you can sometimes overthink it, and that's, I think, unfortunately, he was trying to do the right thing, but ultimately it backfired. If it had worked, it was a brilliant move. Unfortunately, and then when it didn't work, obviously you're like, oh no, geez, he should have stuck with what he has. But no, look, I think I think look, Henry has shown that himself and his backroom team have enough smarts and tactical nous to get there, and Eamon O'Shea should be the icing on the cake to try and get them that little bit step further.
So, Brian, what's your final prediction for how 2024 is going to go for Galway?
Final prediction. Being honest, I'm on the fence about them. I'm not convinced based off this league. Could I say for definite I think they'll win the Leinster final? I couldn't. Could I say that they win the All-Ireland? Jesus, I'm not a betting man anyway, but I'd be keeping my money in my pocket when it comes to backing Galway. Are they capable of doing it? Yes, they are. Have they the players to do it? Yes, they have. Have we seen it consistently enough? Definitely not. So, what can they do? Being honest, we'll know after the Wexford game where Galway are at. As I said, I think the Kilkenny fixture is almost not that it's irrelevant. I don't think we'll know where Galway are at after that, whether the winners. I think we'll know where they're at after the Wexford game, whether we're seeing that brash, bully type or Galway that they should be approaching with. If we're seeing that, I think Galway are capable of winning Leinster. They're capable of really having a rattle at the All-Ireland Championship. But if we see the inconsistent approach we've seen the last few years, I think we'll just see something similar. I think we'll see Galway exit towards the latter stages of the championship.
The league was obviously slow to get going in one sense, Brian, but championship only coming around the corner. You've been on co-commentary throughout the league, but as the championship is starting to approach, is there a bit of excitement for you now being involved in these championship days?
Oh yeah, definitely. Look, it's an absolute pleasure to be co-commentating. It's like you have a bird's eye view of the games. You're spoilt from that perspective. There's a buzz being on the radio, getting caught up with the atmosphere. Big hurling games, particularly in Munster. Let's call a spade, and I'm a proud Leinster man. But the fact that we're trying to do our best by hurling, by having 6 teams in the championship, by inviting Galway, by inviting Antrim, even by inviting Kerry. We've a rest of Ireland championship while the Munster 5 have this sacrosanct championship. And yes, it's a brilliant entity. There's no one doubting it for 1 second, but it's the top 5 and basically affect the rest. And I think the Leinster Council does their more than their fair share for hurling, for growing the game of hurling. We have a Leinster under 20 championship that has the 4 provinces involved. And it's protect the Munster 5 at all costs. And as I said, look, you can see the pros and cons to it, but it's also very, very frustrating that, that Leinster teams, look, we don't deserve to be in Leinster Championship based off the current system, but it's very frustrating that, Offaly, Laois, Westmeath, that we're not even entitled or not allowed to play in our own provincial championship. So, that can be very, very frustrating. And I know I'm digressing in my point there, but it does take from the Leinster Championship per se, because
Does something need to be done there?
It does, but it means ripping up the whole idea of everything. I think it's something similar with football. I think we see that the tiered system really, really works in football. And I think some serious thought needs to be put into it. The league, by its design, is a better way of playing the game of hurling or the game of football. Where the top teams play the top teams, and your provincial championship maybe is back to a knockout competition that's played as like an FA Cup almost. It'll still always have respect. No, as Conor Glass said, no one ever regrets winning them. But the game. I think the game of hurling and the game of football could be so much better if we rethought it and went with a blank slate. Definitely. But go back to your original question. Am I looking forward to which I'm definitely. I think. Obviously Limerick are the team to beat. We have 4 or 5 other teams there that are, really chomping at the bit. Big games all over the place. I'm down to do Waterford Cork in the first round of the championship. The unknown entity that is Waterford right now. Davy promises that something big is coming. We're still to see it, but you're still half afraid of it if it does come. It has to come out that day, I think. Cork look like they're finally starting to put a bit of consistency into their team, a bit of steel. The likes of Robert the Downeys in particular, adding that bit of steel. Mark Coleman back into it. Darragh Fitzgibbon coming back as well. Alan Connolly looks to be, getting over his injury issues. Cork seem to be coming with something, but again, the consistency has been their issue. Clare really look like they're coming. Kilkenny are never far away. So look, there's lots to be positive about in the game. So it's exciting times. You'd just love the ground to firm up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's something that probably the football managers are saying over the last couple of weeks in the build up to the league finals. It's the weather we're after having starting championships so early in April. Okay, it's mid-April for the hurling, but you certainly would like to see a little bit more bounce or given or a little bit more firmness in the ground, so the ball is bouncing off the ground and not just getting stuck in the muck, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, because it's not what we associate with championship hurling, I suppose. So, but look, at the same time, the game is probably in a really, really strong position all around it. And I suppose outside of Limerick, everyone's wondering, are Limerick going to do what's never been done before, win the 5 in a row? And at the same time, everyone, there's those 4 or 5 teams really believe that they can actually stop them. And there's a party of, being an absolute neutral because Offaly can't win. There's a party I would love to see Limerick do the 5 in a row, and there's a party I'd love to see them stopped. So it's all to look forward to.
Exactly. Exciting times ahead as the championship approaches. That's all we do have time for on today's podcast. Brian, thanks a million for coming on.
Thanks, Paul.